Welcome to the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings here at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Tuesday, May 13th, 2025. Good to have you on board, everybody. It is a real Navy day here in Annapolis. It's pouring out, which makes it a perfect day for the class of 2028. The plebes are having their what they call sea trials, which looks a lot like Navy SEAL BUDS training, although it's just for one day, but it's pretty hard stuff. And they're out rolling in the mud today, swimming in the Chesapeake and the Severn, in and out of combat rubber raiding craft and everything. Anyway, they look like they're miserable, but they'll be happy when it's over at the end of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by the members of the Naval Institute. Since 1873, the members have been the foundation of the open forum of proceedings and everything else we do here at the Naval Institute, from events and conferences to our award-winning press books to our USNI news team. If you're already a member, thank you. If you're not yet, go to usni.org/join and become a member today. As I said last week, May is International Navies Month for Proceedings. And for the past 5 years, we've had retired Navy Captain Jim Finel write an update on the Chinese PLA Navy. So I'm happy to welcome Jim back to the show again. His update this year is titled "The PLA Navy Comes of Age, Big Decks and More." If you have the print issue of the magazine, you can find it on pages 66 through 69. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Bill, it's great to be back with you. Good to see you.
All right. And Jim, as always, is joining us from Switzerland, where he retired and moved to Switzerland because that's where his wife was from. So he's 6 or so time zones ahead of us, and morning here in Annapolis and afternoon there in Switzerland. But he's wearing an Aloha shirt, which is kind of a trademark thing for Jim because he spent so much time in the Indo-Pacific. Speaking of which, I'll just remind our listeners and viewers, if you're new to Captain Finel, he served multiple tours as a naval intelligence officer, many in the Indo-Pacific, including as the N2 for the Kitty Hawk Carrier Strike Group. He was the 7th Fleet N2, and he was the Director of Intelligence for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And Jim has been singularly focused on the rise of the Chinese Navy more than anyone else I know, and he started sounding the alarm about its rapid growth and modernization probably more than 20 years ago. So Jim is the right person every year to write about the PLA Navy. He does a fantastic job sort of summarizing the big events. If you don't follow the PLA Navy every week to week or month to month, Jim just does a great summary of everything that's happened in the past year and what it means. So Jim, first question, what do you mean by the PLA Navy comes of age?
Well, Bill, first of all, thanks for the introduction. I'm the title this year was kind of not so it wasn't one event that really made me think of that phrase that they've come of age. It was kind of the totality of what I saw the Chinese Navy produce and what I saw them do with their fleet. From we'll talk about later on, but I mean just the operations, the unprecedented new events that they did in terms of operating, surface action groups and carrier strike groups in different parts of the Pacific at the same time in many different places. Operating carriers together, operating carriers and basically expeditionary strike groups and carrier strike groups together. Operating with the Russians as always, but not just in the Western Pacific, but also out in the Gulf of Oman and with the Iranians. So there's a lot of things that they did. But you got the sense that the Chinese and the PLA Navy today are really they're a real blue water Navy. They're doing blue water operations, flying carrier sorties out in the middle of the Philippine Sea, close to Guam, and that kind of stuff. So I think we've kind of we downplay them sometimes. So we have over the last 20, 25 years for right reasons, maybe 20 years ago. But I think today we have to really recognize that they're a peer competitor. They're not 10 feet tall and they've got some limitations. But in terms of their capabilities and capacities, they're a peer to us, and we need to recognize that and deal with that.
Yeah, everyone says a picture's worth 1,000 words, and in your article, There's a picture from last October. It's the first time two Chinese carrier strike groups operated together at sea. So describe what's in the image. We'll add the image later in the post-production. Describe what's in the image and why it was particularly significant.
Well, for those of us who operated out in the Western Pacific inside the 7th Fleet confines over the last 15 or so years, we remember Valiant Shield exercises where the U.S. Navy, U.S. 7th Fleet would operate dual or even 3 carrier strike groups, and we take the photo op at the end of the exercise, and that became kind of a visual symbol of the strength of the Pacific Fleet and the 7th Fleet to the Western Pacific nations. And we were the ones that did that. Nobody else could do it. And so all of a sudden now we see last October the PLA Navy's first 2 carriers, the Liaoning CV-16 and then Shandong CV-17, operating together in the South China Sea together with their combined strike groups, with escorts and with destroyers and cruisers and oilers. And we don't know if there's submarines there. There are probably submarines there. That didn't show up in the picture. But the point is that they were doing what we can do. And they're there operating together, showing that they're a powerful Navy. And if you go back to, I think, 2018, we had the other picture that I think we've talked about before. In 2018, Xi went down to the South China Sea, and they put on a 49-ship armada that operated in the South China Sea, led by a single carrier at that time. I think it was Liaoning. And they had 49 total combatants that were operating there at that time, to include submarines. And that was the largest naval formation, naval armada that had operated in the South China Sea since the U.S. 7th Fleet had operated down there in the Vietnam War. So they like to put in messages to the world and to the region that they're strong and powerful. And by projecting 2 carrier strike groups in the South China Sea, it sends a message to every one of those ASEAN nations down there that the big dog is China. And not only do they have all those carrier strike groups working together, but they have their 3 bases down there already in the Spratlys, which with 3 of the Mischief, Fiery Cross, and Subi Reef have, 10,000-foot runways, and they're operating ships and submarines and aircraft out of those areas as well. So if you're the Philippines, if you're Vietnam, if you're any other nation down there, or a visiting nation coming through, Canada, Australia, whatever, India, you have to recognize now that China's got kind of this headlock on the South China Sea that they did not have when I retired at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. It's in 10 years, they've transformed themselves into being the dominant maritime force, at least in the South China Sea and inside the East China Sea.
Yeah, and in that image, there's 9 or 10 J-15 fighters are airborne above the 2 aircraft carriers. It's a picture that, as you said, until now and really until last year, the United States Navy was the only Navy that could do that, right? And when I first saw the image, as we were putting together the magazine and we were picking images and we sit around at the table and we flash images up, like which one should we use for different articles, that image went up on the screen. And my mind immediately thought, 2 U.S. Navy carrier strike groups, right? That's a picture that we've all seen. As my boss mentioned when I pointed out the picture to him, he goes, "Yeah, that's the most dangerous evolution that you can do is the photo app for multiple carrier strike groups. Just trying to align that, get all the airplanes airborne and the ships all in position and all that stuff." But anyway, that picture, as we were doing our photo meeting last month, and then I went, wait a minute, that's 2 Chinese carrier strikers with J-15 fighters airborne. Like that's a big deal. That is a significant moment, right, in that the development of the PLA Navy and them showing off, right? They're no longer biding their time and hiding their capabilities. They are now, to your point, mature. They're presenting themselves. Here we are, and this is what we can do. It's pretty impressive.
And just to add on one point, one of those carriers, the Liaoning, their first carrier, she had been at sea for a month or more at that point. She had been operating in the Philippine Sea, and she had, at one 4-day period, had flown 630 sorties out in the Philippine Sea in deep blue water. So and then she went and operated way down south east of Luzon in an area where they had never really operated before, and then came up through the Bashi Channel and down into the South China Sea to join the Shandong. And then they pulled back into port into Hainan, and they were both pier side. There's another commercial image shot that shows both carriers sitting on either side of a pier at one of the newly made piers at there in Hainan Island. So there's just a lot of messaging and capability that they're demonstrating. And what also stands out is no reports of from any of our allies and friends that there were any problems in terms of fighter ramp strikes or any kind of mishaps like that. No Class A mishaps reported in all their operations in this last year.
Interesting. Yeah. Let's talk about large deck amphibious ships, because that's a big part of your wrap up this year. So last December, China launched the first Type 076 amphibious assault ship, the Sichuan. What's special about this ship? How's it different from the Type 075 LHA, LHD type of ships they've been building? And how many do you expect the PLAN is going to build of this new class of ship?
Well, this is a kind of an LHA LHD. It's about 50,000 tons. The Chinese say it's 40,000 tons, but further analysis from other organizations said that when it's at full weight, it's going to be 50,000 tons, which is, the Type 075 is 35 to 40,000 tons.
Big ships.
It's a big ship, and interestingly, it's designed to launch UCAVs, unmanned combat aerial vehicles, and they have installed these electromagnetic aircraft launch system. So in addition to their carrier CV-18 Fujian, which is in her 8th or 9th set of sea trials right now, testing out their EMALs, which is their first ship to have EMALs that they developed. Now we see it on this LHA LHD. That's called the Yulon class, is what they've called this class of ship. There's just this one, as you said, the Sichuan. And so we're expecting to see some kind of testing of these UCAVs, unmanned vehicles, launching off from this in combination with the launching of, LCACs and amphibious fighting vehicles and, 1,000 or more Marines, Chinese Marines, PLA Navy Marines that'll be on board this ship. So it is in addition to an expansion of the Type 075, which I had thought would be kind of the lead platform of their expeditionary strike groups. You'd have the Type 075, which is in this 35 to 40,000 ton range, LHA, amphibious assault helicopter carrier. And then you'd have the Type 071s, dock landing ships, to accompany them. They're around 20 to 25,000 tons. And those would be the kind of the lead platforms escorted by cruisers and destroyers. And that would be the formation of their ESG or expeditionary strike groups. They have 8 of these Type 071s. So that's an indicator to me that there's probably going to be at least 4, maybe 6, at least expeditionary strike groups if you use the 2 to 1 or less. So they have some in maintenance and some in repair or whatnot. So they'll probably have at least 4 of these expeditionary strike groups. And now you have a Type 076 and 3 Type 075s, all produced here within the last 5 years. Less than 5 years, they produced 4 of these big decks, 075s, 076s. Will they produce another 076? It's possible. They kind of have this pattern of where they'll produce 1 or 2 of a platform, test it out, and if they like it, then they may go into mass production of it. It's a little bit different as they get bigger. They not like the smaller Type 054 Alpha Zhangkai frigates or even the destroyers, where they can pump those out of the 056 corvettes, the Zhangjiao corvettes. Those they can pump out much faster after they build a couple and recognize that that's the platform and design that they like. This may take a little bit longer, but I wouldn't be surprised to see more of these. And it's very, very interesting, obviously, that they installed EMALs. The fact that they're putting EMALs, they're the first nation to put EMALs on an amphibious warship. We haven't done that. We're still dealing with the USS-4.
EMALs, that stands for Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System.
Correct.
Right. So it's catapults, but they're electromagnetic rather than steam catapults. Similar to the USS.
And it made a specific point to say arresting as well. So there's something to do with electromagnetic arresting wires as well, which is a whole much more complex. As you and I both know from our time on carriers, we have a pretty set system with our steam operated arresting gear. Now you have introduced this electromagnetic system. So very advanced, I guess what I'd say. Obviously, they got a lot of the technology through hook or crook through us. We just saw a report here this week. Chinese were talking about they have a new, they've used artificial intelligence to help them improve their degaussing capability by 60% efficiency. They've made it more efficient by 60%. That's their claim. I think you can say, well, probably that's because you were using an old, outmoded method of degaussing, and now you go on the internet and you use AI to search all data and come up with a better system. So it's another form of intellectual property that they get from outside of China, I would guess. And they're using that. So they're using this kind of technology to advance. They're leapfrogging things. They leapfrogged steam in their carriers. They went from ski jump ramps to electromagnetic aircraft launch system. They skipped a whole generation that you and I grew up on.
Right, right. So you're right that the growing size of the Chinese amphibious fleet reflects the seriousness with which the Central Military Commission is heeding Xi Jinping's directive to have the capability to take Taiwan. So expand on that a bit, because there's a lot of discussion about, can China take Taiwan? Will they take Taiwan? What's the timeline and all that stuff? But they're growing they're growing an amphibious fleet. And we just talked about that with the Type 075s, the Type 76, and the Type 071s, right? But they're building that capability that Xi Jinping said, I want this capability.
Right, and then you add in the civilian roll-on, roll-off ferries that we've seen used in exercises. You add in this new platform, the Shuqiao bridging platforms that we saw that just came out this summer. Sorry for the ring.
It's okay.
These new bridging platforms, those are about 1,000 feet long, over 350 meters long, and they're being used to make that last mile to the beach, or the last 1,000 yards to the beach. It was one of the knocks that the PLA always had, was they don't have the amphibious lift. Now they've built lift. They're using civilian lift. And then there was the criticism, well, they can't get across obstacles that are on the beach that Taiwan would put together, whether they're man-made obstacles or the natural obstacles, they're rocks or whatnot. Now with these new bridging systems, they can get across those, over those, and start driving in amphibious fighting vehicles and other tanks and things of that nature. So they've gone through it looks like a very complex analysis, what they call their scientific development process, where they just go in and analyze these things, and they've come up with their own plan. It's unique. Now you have the Type 076, it has UCAVs that'll be used. So, in an invasion, you expect to lose platforms. Well, if you're launching off unmanned platforms, combat platforms, to go fight and do part of the invasion, if you lose them, it's not going to impede your ability to keep going, like it would be maybe if you start losing air crew and things of that nature when you try to establish air superiority. If you just lose UCAVs, then okay, you use a new one, you'll fly out a new one, and you'll just keep pumping those in across these new platforms. So it seems like they've framed the problem. They've developed the problem. They're testing the problem, as we saw throughout the year in these joint sword exercises and things of that nature. This year we saw Straight Thunder. They've renamed the exercise now. It's called Straight Thunder. So they're testing their platforms. They're testing their concepts. And I think the only thing that's left is really to see this kind of mass, if they really go into a large mass in certain areas. But again, what we don't really have, I think guys like Tom Shugart and others have done, Captain Tom Shugart, retired, has identified these civilian aspects of how the Chinese will be a total war if they decide to invade Taiwan. It won't just be the PLA Navy by itself. It'll be a joint fighting force. It's under a joint organizational construct now with the Eastern Theater Command, supported by supporting commands like the Joint Logistics Support Force and the Information Warfare Support Force. And then you have the civilian provincial governors there with their own assets, civilian assets, and control over the civilian means of providing ships and aircraft and personnel that'll all be integrated into this.
Wow. Yeah. So clearly they're taking this challenge from Xi seriously, right? Whether or not an invasion is going to happen in a year, 2, 3 years, the capability is being built to do that if and when the political leaders make a decision to do something, right? We'll get back to that in a second. But first, I want to ask just if you could recap some of the other new capabilities that PLA Navy has been adding in the last year or so. So we've seen the Renhai class cruisers. These are like 12,000 ton, real serious surface warfare platforms with 100 and something vertical launch cells. They're building new submarines. Talk about those a little bit and maybe some of what they're doing with unmanned systems.
Right. Well, the big one is a Type 055 Renhai class cruiser, 12,000 tons, 112 vertical launch cells. And we thought we saw 8 of those produced up through last year. But at the end of this 2024, we saw, hey, there's 2 more that are being built. So the production line didn't end. So why do they need 8 more? Well, if we get back to they want to have at least 4 carrier strike groups and at least 4 expeditionary strike groups, then you could say, well, 8 Renhai class cruisers, put you on the edge if you have material, operational readiness, maintenance cycle issues. So maybe you want 12 to have 8 available to support the carriers and expeditionary strike groups, or they want to have more of those. And so when will the line stop? How many more will they build? Obviously, they are very pleased with that platform, and they're using it, and they're using it a lot. They used it in these exercise with the Russians. They sent them up into the Sea of Japan and up into the more northern waters of the Pacific, the northern Pacific, to exercise with the Russians. They've used them, and they're obviously to escort the carrier strike group. So every time a carrier strike group goes out now, whether it's the Liaoning, Shandong, or the Fujian, they're being escorted by a Type 055 Renhai class cruiser. So they're going to need more to be able to do the things that they want to do. We haven't really seen them do a lot of stuff out into the Indian Ocean yet, but I think that's the next step. Is we'll start seeing more of that. Maybe they're going to start every once in a while escorting their 3 ships surface action groups that patrol the Gulf of Aden, have the Type 055 go with them. So that's one area they've added in. They extended the line on the Type 052 Delta Lima, the DL, which is the extended version length of the Luoyang 3 class destroyers, guided missile destroyers. So that kind of was thought to be stopped, that production line, but then we saw it resume again here in 2024. Another platform that they like, goes very well and complements the Renhai class cruiser, which you could call the Alpha Whiskey of their strike groups, and then these destroyers, with very potent, capable guided missile systems, YJ-18s and things of that nature, and phased array radar. So they've got this great, with the Renhai class and the Luoyangs, they got this great phased array radar capability to give them good coverage around their strike groups and operations. So those 2 lines have resumed. They've been doing work on submarine pier expansion, both for production up in the Bohai and down in the South China Sea and Hainan, to have more space to operate their submarines. We're expecting, the new class of the type of boomers and SSNs to come online. And then there was a mishap this last year. Again, Tom found this. I was a little bit hesitant to jump on it, but he did a really good job of finding this small submarine with an X-fin on the rear and stern that apparently sank at pier site up in Wuhan on the Yangtze. And it was estimated, based on some of the writings, that it probably had a small nuclear reactor, or could have a small nuclear reactor. So this thing sank at the pier. We haven't seen it since then. But the point is that the Chinese are, in all facets of naval warfare, they're not sitting still. They're moving forward. They're developing new platforms, new systems, new testing. Putting a small nuclear reactor on a small, or I don't want to call it a midget submarine, but a small boat like that is something that I don't think a lot of people had anticipated. There was some writings that had come up in 2017, 2018 from a Chinese admiral that a few people in the open source world had found, Rick Fisher to be specific. But we didn't really, I think, as an institution, recognize that these new things were coming. So it just, everywhere you look, they're testing and making new things. There's just a new article out this last week from Andrew Erickson about a new space event support ship that will help provide support for all their, their space launches. And so they're improving platforms that they've had already for 20 years. They're now making a new version of it, making it better, bigger, better systems, better technology.
How about on the unmanned side? Like, what are you seeing for, naval unmanned aircraft, unmanned surface vessels, and maybe even unmanned undersea vessels?
They are moving forward in those areas as well. I don't have a lot of the depth of the information on those, but I do see them reporting on unmanned systems from underneath the sea, on the sea, and above the sea. This carrier, the amphibious carrier, the Type 076, that's a platform that they think is designed to support unmanned carrier combat aircraft vehicles. So that's one area. The surface vessels, we see a lot of reporting on it. I haven't seen a lot of operational reflections of that. I just see reporting from the Chinese that they're developing these systems. We know that they like the drones and things of that nature. We'll see a lot of drone activity in China, just in the commercial and public sector, but we're seeing the reflections of it in their writings about what they're building. So it's going to be integrated. So some of these ships, maybe the Type 076, in addition to having unmanned aircraft, will have unmanned surface vessels or unmanned amphibious landing craft. Who knows? But they're very much moving into this idea. We talk about distributed maritime operations on our side. I think they have the same vision and goal to do the same kind of thing, where all their systems and platforms are networked together to operate together and to execute their mission, almost from some kind of grand strategic plan where somebody could control it from back on the mainland, if you will. That'll be an achievement that I think a lot of us that go to sea will be interested to see how well they could exercise this and show it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of high-profile news stories over the last few months. I just wanted to ask your opinion on them. So the first is the security situation in the Red Sea, the Houthi attacks on commercial shipping. We've seen the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, other carriers. Now it's the Truman. They're conducting strike operations against the Houthis, protecting international maritime shipping, etc. But the Chinese, they've got a counter-piracy task force in the Fifth Fleet, what we call Fifth Fleet area of responsibility. They've got a base out there, in the Middle East that they've operated from. So they're in the vicinity with the task force, a naval task force, have been since you and I were, looking at this when I was in Hawaii and you were out in Seventh Fleet. Since that's like almost 17, 18 years ago. It's been quite some time, right? And they've kept that forward presence out in the northern Red Sea, or the northern Arabian Sea, sorry, since then. But they haven't participated. So why not? And what's their thinking on that? What's their rationale on not coming to the rescue of international sea lines of communication, free seas, and stopping that threat to shipping?
Well, I think it just it's a reflection, Bill, of what their grand strategy is vis-a-vis, the United States and working with us, and they don't have any interest in doing that, even though they say, today Xi gave a speech at some event and talked about China's leading world peace and security and prosperity, and that's what China's all about. But they have done nothing. They've lifted zero fingers to help in this Red Sea, Suez Canal, Houthi fight area. But they did have enough wherewithal to send ships to do an exercise with the Russians and the Iranians in those same waters here last year, and this year they've done it 5 years in a row. It's called Maritime Security Belt. So they did Maritime Security Belt 2024 last year with over 20 combatants across these three nations. These three, some would say, are hostile nations to the United States, but they didn't do anything to help keep those waterways open. It was the United States is the one that has done that, and our carriers. So I think just by that alone, it sends a signal that we're in some kind of return to I don't like to use the term Cold War, but we're in some kind of separating where some people are aligning with the PRC and people are aligning with the United States and freedom and democracy and the Western order that we've had since the end of World War II. So, and it's a signal, I think, that says, hey, China, Russia, Iran, we are together, and we're not going to be intimidated by the United States, and we're not going to sacrifice anything to help you guys. You guys want something, you want the free flow of goods that go to Europe, and the fuel and oil and all that comes through those waterways of the Suez and the Red Sea, then you can patrol it. And oh, by the way, we may help the Houthis, be a bee in your bonnet. But it's more than a bee in your bonnet. I mean, for the folks that wear the uniform that we did, they're in harm's way while they're operating there, and we're just lucky that nobody's been killed so far.
Yeah, 100%. Have you seen any reports? I've heard rumors, but I don't want to just pass on rumors. But that the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, I know the Iranians are helping the Houthis. Any evidence that the Chinese are also, helping you just mentioned a bee in the bonnet, right? But so that I picked up on that hint there. But is there evidence that the Chinese have been either providing, information on the movement of ships and including American Navy ships in the Red Sea, or providing that maybe through an Iranian proxy, or providing material support for weapon systems and those sorts of things to the Houthis?
I have not seen any firm evidence that says, here's a Chinese silkworm or here's a Chinese weapon. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen anything that says that the Iranians are getting weapons from the Chinese and then passing them on to the Houthis. But I will say that we do have evidence that the Chinese are buying Iranian oil illegally. So that, in a way, in and of itself, is a help to the Iranian regime and their malfeasance in the Middle East there.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That the connection, as you mentioned, multiple, and it's in your article too, multiple instances of Chinese and Russian naval exercises last year, out in the Indo-Pacific, as you mentioned, in the Gulf of Oman area with the Iranians. How they term it something like an unlimited friendship or an unlimited partnership, right? Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, they don't see any limitations on their camaraderie between nations.
Right. Well, another image that it's not a naval image per se, but an image that grabbed my attention this last couple of weeks was watching the Y-20 PLA Air Force Y-20 conduct air-to-air refueling with Egyptian MiG-29s.
Wow.
A very crystal clear, photo execution exercise for the PLA Air Force, and they showed this refueling going on over there in around the Suez, around the Red Sea, just to show you how far things have changed. That's a very complex and very demanding operation to do air-to-air refueling, and here we are watching PLA Air Force refuel Egyptian MiG-29s.
Interesting. Second issue I wanted to ask you about is China-Taiwan. That's, the focus of so much effort. Former U.S. Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Franchetti, was very focused on getting the U.S. Navy ready for a possible war with China by 2027. She wrote about a countdown clock in her office that counted down the days until 2027. We're now about a year and a half from that, so it's coming up pretty quickly. A lot of our listeners and readers are familiar with the Davidson window, but beyond that, you had written in Proceedings about 10 years ago about the decade of danger, the decade of concern, right? Which we are in now. We're within the Davidson window. We're a year and a half from 2027, which gets to Franchetti's concern. We're definitely within that decade of concern that you wrote about almost a decade ago. Are you more concerned, now than a year ago? Less concerned, about the same, in terms of, the possibility of China-Taiwan war kicking off, which would really probably be at least an Indo-Pacific war with, the United States involved, with our other allies and partners involved, perhaps Australia, Japan, the Koreans, et cetera. I mean, it could rapidly go into, a World War III kind of scenario, which is everyone's fear. So where's the Jim Finel concern meter on the China-Taiwan, warning problem right now?
I'm very concerned. Obviously, from the things I wrote about in this year's article about the capabilities that the PLA Navy has acquired in just this one 12-month period is enough to, cause you a great concern. But over the course of this time that we're talking about, when I first started talking about the decade of concern, it was back in 2010, 2011, when I was in uniform. That was internal to the Navy, and my thesis is that the PLA had been ordered by both Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping to have the capability to take Taiwan by 2020. Now, we've seen reports since the last director of CIA said that they had moved that to 2027, which comports with the Davidson window. But I know for a fact that the orders were given from those two previous paramount leaders 2020. So they've been working for 5 years past their order date. And then the question, and then, I always make sure I say this. I don't believe that the Chinese Communist Party really wants to use military power. If they can get Taiwan without using it, that's the acme of skill, right? That's what Sun Tzu said.
Yeah,
you can get what you want without firing a shot. That's what you want to do. So I believe that's what they prefer to do. They've been working on doing. They've isolated Taiwan diplomatically. There's only 12 nations that recognize them today compared to over 24 a decade ago. Economically, they've been trying to, maneuver them, entice them to continue to build things in China, but also pressure them in other ways. And then the military piece is obviously meant to shape them to say, hey, if you don't straighten up and get to some kind of an agreement with us, we're going to use this. I think the real issue and I described this in that piece I wrote for Proceedings some years ago, was as this decade goes forward, at some point there are people inside the inner circle, the Central Military Commission and the Standing Committee of the Politburo. They're going to say, hey, listen, we want to have this big ceremony in 1 October 2049 to cement and celebrate the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. And we can't do that if we don't have the Taiwan issue straightened out. And we want to straighten that out without force. But if we're going to use force, at some point we will have to make a decision to use it. And if we do decide to use it, we have to give ourselves some time afterward to allow the world to forget about what happened so that they'll all come and celebrate with us. And so I hypothesized that there was an example. The time from Tiananmen Square in 1989 until the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and the stark images between what happened in 89 and what we saw at the Bird's Nest Stadium in 2008, there's about a 20-year period. So if you back off 20 years from 2049, it's 2030. So we're in this period right now, and we're already seeing reflections of this. In this last year, we saw purges of senior PLA officials. The Minister of Defense was purged. There was talk of even the new Minister of Defense being purged, and he's not. Obviously, Admiral Dong was just in France this week, meeting with his counterparts from the French military. But the point is that we're seeing reflections in the PLA's growth, not just in the Navy, but in the Air Forces, the rocket forces, the space forces, everything growing towards this capability. We're seeing reflection, not just what they build, but what they're doing with it around Taiwan in these joint sword exercises last year. Last December was a massive exercise around Taiwan with 60 combatants at one point. And now you have Straight Thunder. That just came out here, in February, March. So you have Straight Thunder, and they call it Straight Thunder 2025 Alpha. So when's Bravo, Charlie, Delta going to happen? What are we going to see later on throughout this year? So they're priming themselves to be able to do this. So, many ways, if you practice and you prepare and you talk yourself into something, and you can get to this point where you're going to actually use the force. And so the real question is, how can we deter that? How can we deter them from doing that? And so we have a lot of things to do. But from my perspective, one of the things we need to do is to have more ships and submarines and aircraft from the U.S. Navy out in the Pacific So I think this administration's working on that in some form or fashion. I would like to see more. I'm very excited about the Office of Shipbuilding and the focus and the actual president talking about shipbuilding. That's good. So let's do more of that, and let's deter Xi. Let's throw doubt into their minds. Let's throw sand into their planning process. Let's make them go back to the drawing board and recalculate their compositions of what they believe they need to be able to take Taiwan. And I think we're starting to see reflections in Taiwan of a more serious nature of the administration in Taiwan. President Lai came out here this spring with a 17-point plan of how they're going to push back and combat China's predatory behavior. They need to do a lot more. There's a lot more we all can do, because we've obviously failed over a 25-year period to deter the Chinese Communist Party from their desires to take Taiwan. So we're going to have to do something more.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the sort of overwhelming amount of Chinese military activity around Taiwan over the last couple of years. You point out it's not just the large exercises that you mentioned, but there's almost constant incursions across the Taiwan Strait into the air defense identification zone of Taiwan. The Taiwans are constantly having to launch aircraft to go out and monitor, and their ships are out at sea monitoring and watching and trying to, push back to some extent against the PLA. But that's wearing out their current force, right? So there's just a lot going on, and it sort of inures everybody to, well, this is just ops normal. Well, ops normal today is 10 times what it was, 10 years ago, right? And so
dramatically different.
It's dramatically different. Great way to say it. Well, Jim, as always, this is a fascinating conversation. We're running out of time. Just one more an opportunity. Any saved rounds before we sign off?
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the fleet and the Navy Institute, and really honored to participate in these discussions. And I'm glad that, when you and I were still in uniform, it didn't seem like there was a lot of focus on what we call the main thing. It seems like we got a lot of focus on the main thing now, and that's good. And I just hope it's not too late to be able to stem this, which you said would be a catastrophic event if they were to go ahead and launch an invasion. So we don't want that. We don't want war, but we can't shy away from deterrence. That's the main thing that we need to be able to do.
Yeah, and as you and I learned in our careers, the only way to prevent war is to be prepared for war, right? So,
Amen.
Got to be ready for it. All right. Well, my guest today is our go-to expert on the Chinese PLA Navy, retired U.S. Navy Captain Jim Finel. Jim, thanks for your annual update on the PLAN in Proceedings, and for your time on the show today.
Well, thank you, Bill. Great to be with you.
All right. Well, May is always exciting here in Annapolis. We have our annual meeting for the Naval Institute, our 152nd annual meeting, the Blue Angels show, and the Naval Academy class of 2025 graduation. And then we'll welcome our first group of summer interns here at the Naval Institute the following week. This episode is brought to you by the members of the Naval Institute. Since 1873, our members have been the foundation of everything we do, from proceedings to events and conferences, press books, and USNI News. If you're not yet a member, go to usni.org/join and become one today. Start receiving Proceedings and the USNI News C-Scroll newsletter. And remember, until next episode, victory begins at the Naval Institute.